Thanks, David. Yeah, so we're Cooper House. We generally, as you say, do creative for creatives because that's a lot more interesting than, plumbers and lawyers and stuff. No offense if there was any plumbers in the audience, but we are a husband and wife team, so you can expect us to bicker and finish each other's sentences throughout this presentation.
Always.
To whatever extent necessary. Appreciate being here, and I've already learned a lot of things. We're hoping we can teach you perhaps a thing or two about blog design strategy. So blog design strategy, is essentially a plan that helps structure your blog in the best way possible, functionally and aesthetically. We've been hearing the word content over and over throughout the presentation so far, and probably throughout the day, certainly throughout ours. Obviously, in the case of a blog, content is about the most important thing, and whether your website is only a blog or a blog is a portion of it, that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road as far as how you're interfacing with your clients.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the designer portion of things. I want to cover something before we get too far in this presentation, what a digital touch point is. So a touch point is any time the audience interacts with your brand. A digital touch point is any time the audience interacts with your brand online. I'm not going to minimize the importance of social media because we all know that's a really big, important part of business. But in terms of your blog, it's really a way for you to get their attention and share quality content with them. And it allows you to, kind of show the breadth of what you're capable of. You don't have to truncate it for a tweet. You don't have to try to communicate it in one image. So it really gives you a chance to communicate more. It's really important that we treat our digital touch point as a very, very, very key part of your blog. Next. Okay, so this is kind of the main concept that we're going to be communicating today. A website, no matter its function, is comprised of layers, and these layers exist to frame and promote the content of the site. So the content of your site can be anything depending on what the point of your blog is. If your blog exists to promote your business, that's one thing. You might just be, passionate about cooking or crafting, or you want to share something like that. We work with a lot of lifestyle bloggers, so there's a lot of focus on interior design and fashion and things of that nature. But basically, that content that they're creating is the point of everything else. So everything we're going to go over here today is saying you have to be purposeful when you're creating your blog. You have to consider all these things. The content is the most important part. You don't build a blog and then fill it with content. You need to know what your content is before you start a blog.
Exactly. So as Aaron says, you got to start with the end in mind. Consider the kind of content that you're going to be creating, and that's generally based on what kind of company you are or what the point of your blog is. So you might have an information, editorial, or journal type blog. Obviously, on these types, they're text heavy. That's probably going to be the most important facet of them is the verbiage, the text, the content itself. Images may be interspersed, pull quotes, links like that. But again, it's generally a text-based thing in those situations. Alternatively, you may have the tutorial, portfolio, curatorial type blogs. Personally, those are the more fun type for me to get to develop. They're the more visually interesting, image-heavy, captions, credit sources, links, videos. So it's not just the verbiage that's driving everything. Really, more so, it's the visual content. And so you need to consider that from the beginning and make sure that it's going to be getting the focus. And finally, you might have promotional commentary or reviews type blog, link heavy. There could be videos, credit sources, but really this is kind of a combination between text and image, and they may be given relatively equal weight. So those are factors that might help you in deciding what sort of platform your blog should be, if you still have that decision to make, So based on those facets of your content, you may find that the versatility of your blog is one of the most important things. When I think of versatility, I think about the capability of the blog software or platform to do everything that you're needing to do now, but also what you might potentially want to do in the future. So you want to be forward thinking about that. If you're mostly text heavy now, but you know that in the future you're going to need to be able to feature videos and all other kinds of good stuff. Make sure that's going to be an option so that you don't hit a wall when you come around to getting to that point. How customizable is the software or platform? There it's just a question of right up front, can you get it to do everything that you need it to do? Can it be customized to the point that it can work just how you want it to, or will you be pigeonholed to kind of shoehorn your content into what the system is able to do? Independence is important to consider. We rarely read the hundreds of pages long documents that we hit I agree to when we sign up for one of these free services. And I don't know everything about them. Run them by your lawyer. I don't think anybody actually does that. But my point is just that if you're not completely independent, if you're not self-hosted, then there certainly may be caveats. It is not Google's responsibility to guarantee the safety of your content. While you own the copyright of it, it is certainly possible. I mean, it's under their roof, let's just say. It's on their servers. It is not completely under your control. So if you can find a solution to back it up, certainly do so. Responsiveness is very important, and I'll come to that more here in the next couple of slides, but essentially responsiveness means the ability for your content to look good on various screen sizes. That certainly can't be assumed to be built into every platform. It needs to be anticipated and often developed for. Okay? So 3 blog platforms that we'll mention here, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I think it kind of represents the gamut of the possibilities. First off is WordPress or self-hosted blog. Yeah, it's hard for us not to, show our preference for that as a company that develops sites for people. That's generally where we're going to steer people so that we can have that complete control, total customization.
And it's the most popular in the world.
Yeah,
60
definitely.
million plus websites.
There's a lot. It can be a little bit complex. If I had a client who really just needed to do the most uber simple thing, and I don't want them to feel daunted by the interface when they're logging into WordPress to manage their blog and content, you might look for a more simple solution. But again, with that complete total customization, I could make it simpler for a client who needs to have it that way. But you need a developer and a hosting location to do that. So you have to anticipate some, monthly cost for a server space, which ranges quite widely. I have learned recently working with some more popular blogs. I mean, you can get hosting for as low as $10, but when you get 1 million hits a month, your hosting might cost $600 a month to do it.
Yeah, and I do want to jump in and say that, earlier when everyone was talking about, the popularity of a blog post, you can see using SEO how you could make a blog post really, really popular. And that's how a lot of our bloggers have started out. A lot of the bloggers that we switched over to WordPress started out on Blogger, Google Blogger. It's free, they set it up, and maybe their designs weren't anything special, but they had really good quality content.
Right.
They built their audience, and then when they got to a point where they were, sponsored or they had money to spend and they were ready to get something that was a little bit more grown-up blogging, then they moved on to WordPress. That's not to say that Google Blogger doesn't have any value, but once again, if you are using Google Blogger to build your business, you need to back up your content. There is scary stories about there, and this has happened. People with huge amounts of posts and comments get nuked for some reason. There's some spam, it gets hacked, whatever. That does happen, and Google will just shut them down. And there's no 1-800-Google, please can I have my blog back?
Yeah.
So if you are considering this as part of your business, you need to take responsibility for your content and make sure it's somewhere where you can back it up and it's yours.
Yeah, and God knows some of those huge blogger sites that we've moved to WordPress are just very cumbersome in terms of the sheer amount of data. I mean, the export function built in to Blogger for exporting it will choke on it if you've been, putting up a post every day for 6 years.
Exporting TypePad is really hard.
Yeah. But Blogger is a kind of a good intermediate in as much as it is free, and it also does allow for some customization. So as Aaron says, if you're a smaller company or just something that you're doing personally on the side, you want to start publishing your recipes,
or if you're
things
testing
like that.
the medium, if you think that this
trying
might
to
be a good
develop an
option.
audience before you have any money in the kitty to pay developers to build you an awesome site. That might be a good interim solution. Tumblr's more on the bottom end, where and there's probably lots like this, and I don't know about all of them. But, it's free, and you don't get a whole lot of capability to customize it. I know that there is some,
it does have
but
its
less
function,
so
but
than,
it's not the same as the others.
Exactly. So once you've made that decision on platform, you've got perhaps a more important decision to make about the way it's going to lay out. And this decision is going to have probably the greatest effect aesthetically on your blog and on your site. So things to consider is, the classic columns layout. I mean, to some extent, all blogs and websites line up into columns 1, 2, or 3. You've got the main content in the big column in the middle and some functions over on the left and right, widgets, plugins to facilitate your users navigating around. The magazine style, as I mentioned before, would be the kind of more image-heavy slideshows, videos, big images, small images. You've got more methods by which to capture your users' attention and steer them in certain directions based on calls to action, we call them, which are generally, again, imagery. Portfolio, of course, image intensive as well, but there you just really want to make sure that your portfolio, your work, the things that you've done and the things that you've uploaded to your site are taking center stage and getting your audience attention. It's important to know about excerpts. Excerpts essentially are just a shortened version of any given article or blog entry that you may create. We've all seen these on sites that we go to where you read a little bit and click read more. So if it is an information-based site, very text-heavy, you certainly want your first page to be filled with complete posts where the user has to scroll a long way to even see the second title of recent posts. So by showing titles and short excerpts, the user sees several articles at once and kind of can decide which path they want to go down based on whatever their interests may be. And responsive web design. This has just become more and more important in recent years, and sure has had a tremendous effect on my career as the development end of our team. We just can't make any assumptions these days about what the size of your user's screen is by the time they come to see your site. And we used to try to assume that one size fits all, or to try to hit the market that has 70% share. But I don't think any single market is over 50% share at this point. I
think websites
statistics
are
in front of me.
averaging. Yeah, it used to be in the very small teens, and it has rapidly changed. I think most blog websites you can just imagine like 40% is kind of the average amount of your audience that is accessing your blog on a regular basis through their phone or iPad.
Right. So for projects we build these days, it kind of needs to be assumed that we'll set up responsive, which, as I indicating is a much bigger job for us, for me. So
our prices
we
have gone up,
have
guys.
to roll
Sorry.
that into the price.
It's a lot more work now.
Or tell us you don't want responsive. But the idea there is that if your developer, and my geek is going to show here a little bit, but if your developer has built your site semantically, then one set of HTML can be served to all these devices. And with our style sheets, we can do what are called media queries that can deduce the size of the user screen and serve things up. Am I getting too geeky? But we can, so with the same content, essentially, your developer can make it so that it is styled to fit these different screens effectively, which may mean hiding certain things on a small screen. Or if you've got 3 columns, let's line them up into one long list where the columns are stacked on each other for your iPhone, so that it looks good and so that your content is being presented as best as it can be.
All right, so now we get to talk about the fun stuff that I know about, design. So I'm going to read this for you guys. The best practices, it says, a successful relationship with your audience depends on observing the best practices and standards of web design. And what that actually means is, when it comes to web design, you have a lot of ways that you can be creative. And then there are ways where people try to get creative, and I have to say, no, shut it down. You're not allowed to get creative there. And what I mean is that you don't want to have a lot of crazy names in your navigation. People need to know home, about, contact, services. These are terms that we've all gotten used to. When you come to a website, we have kind of like an inherent knowledge now. We know that the search bar is often in the upper right-hand side. You expect the social media icons on a blog to usually be on the upper right-hand side or in the top of a sidebar. If you want to subscribe to a blog, you don't want to have to hunt around for an RSS feed. When your audience comes to your website, you have moments to capture their attention and to get them to do what you want them to do. And if you get all creative with your name, instead of saying like, oh, this is the about page, you're like, me and my cats. It just confuses people, it upsets them, and it slows things down. You don't want that. So organization and consistency are important. When you're actually coming up with how your blog's going to be laid out, it's your job to sit down and decide what pages are going to be on the site and how they should be organized. And you should do benchmarking. You should look at other sites. Look at the standards. There are actually articles that are available. On our Cooper House blog, probably this week, we're going to post a big, long list of resources. So stop by the website and you can see there's going to be lots of things in there about, best practices for putting this together. And this applies whether or not you're going out and getting a theme on your own or whether or not you're hiring developers. Next. This is something I say to my clients all the time, and I read it verbatim. The goal should always be to create a pleasant and productive experience for your audience using the moderate application of aesthetic choices that in no way impedes their journey. I'm really proud of you if you know how to work Photoshop and you've created a lot of lovely graphics for your site. But if you've distracted from the content, if you've slowed your audience down, you have failed. Sorry. Get rid of some of the, scrollies and cute little things. You really need to make sure that any aesthetic choices you make are only to promote the content, to promote your audience traveling through the website and doing what they need to do. This is nuanced. You can't just hack it up there. Not in this day and age. There are a lot of crappy websites out there, but there are also a lot of really good ones. And the cream rises to the top. The audiences will go to the websites that are easy to use, that feel good. And maybe they can't even tell you why they feel good or why they enjoy that website. That's not their job. That's what user experts do. I mean, they look at these websites and say, okay, this is how the audience is using it. And you have to, notice those things if you're putting a website together and try and follow those kinds of rules. Next. So, blog design tips. Get out your notebooks. This is important. So number one, develop a style guide. You can do this even if you're not a designer. You can do this before you go meet with your designer. These are the things that essentially make up a design. And these are things that I do when you hire me. Color palette. Sometimes we have something like, maybe 7 colors, but on average, we're talking about 5 colors. You're going to have 3 neutrals, a light, medium, and a dark. A lot of people just use, white, medium gray, dark gray, not straight black. Don't do straight black. No, off black. Don't do straight black, unless you're selling car tires. And so you're going to put those down. You're going to learn about hexadecimal values. Once again, if you go look at that blog post that we're going to put up, there's going to be something in there to help you get those numbers. And I'm sure you guys have kind of seen those around the web. So you're going to want to put those into a document. Typography. If you read my blog, I just posted something about this. It says design is 95% typography. You have to make good choices, and you have to be consistent with your choices. And one of the ways you can do that is assign roles to your typography. So for instance, if you're putting together your blog, you choose three fonts is really ideal. So maybe you've got one in your logo, and then you've got web-safe fonts. I'm not going to go too much into that because we don't have time, but essentially, you want to keep it clean, keep it simple, and keep it consistent. So if your blog post titles are one thing, it'd be a good idea to mirror that font in your header. So this indicates this is something of importance. All your links due here, your calls to action, those should all be in a similar font, very similar style. Your design elements are usually something really simple, and unless you're on a unicorn blog or something fancy with glitter, you don't really. I know, I read all of them. You don't want a lot of flourish. The best websites really do focus on the content, so keep your design elements simple and don't overdo it.
I just want to interject here that, when you're working with a team of professionals, or even in the case where you have purchased a professional theme for one of these existing sites, a lot of these decisions will either be made in the early process of working with those professionals or just plain beforehand, by the people who developed that theme. And the nice thing about that is again, I mentioned style sheet before, that some of these things are just kind of defined so that moving forward, every time you create a title for a new post, it will inherit that style that has been predetermined.
Exactly. And one thing that we're not really touching on in this speech today, but it is kind of important, is your branding. If you work with a branding agency, anybody worth their salt is going to give you these things before you even get started. If the person who designed your logo, I hate that word, logo, if they designed your logo and they didn't give you any indication about your typography or your color palette, or they didn't provide you with all the file types you need, then go back to them and get that, or find someone that will. We ended up doing branding because a lot of our clients came to us and they didn't have these things. We have kind of integrated that into our program, but it's important.
So that style guide can be used beyond the web, to help remind you how best to treat your brand.
Exactly. So when you create your custom graphics, these are just the simple things that you'll need. Once again, if you've gone to a branding agency, you'll already have your header. You can ask them to create custom icons. That's a simple add-on that we do. Just those little things, making sure your social media icons, they're original, they match your branding, they all tie in together. The sidebar extras and background images, I don't think it's really that important to go overboard on these things. They should be simple. So the last thing, keep it simple. The design exists in the details. I think it was Charles Ames who just says, the design is the details. That's what it is. It's those little things that people barely even notice. You look at a site and you're like, oh, this is so easy to use, it's so elegant, it's sophisticated, whatever. Why is it that way? And it's really just those little details. Next. The last slide here is form follows function always. I can't emphasize enough that the content, and there's going to be a lot of people talking about how to create that great content today, but the content really is the point. You can have a beautifully designed blog, but if your content is awful or it's hacky or you didn't try very hard, obviously you're not going to get that kind of, I mean, even if you do good SEO, I mean, there's poop pictures can only get you so far, man. I mean, that wasn't even a very good photo.
Well, what about lots of poop pictures?
Lots of poop pictures, that is an industry I don't even want to like think about. Okay, so anyway, make your content excellent. That's important. That's up to you. That's making sure everything is tight. When you put it up there, it should be the kind of thing that people want to share. If they're not talking about it with their coworkers or their friends or anything, then it's not really of any value. Make your site easy to use. That goes back to the organization. If your site is well organized, if it's beautiful, then people will want to use it and they will come back to it. And make your design reflect your brand. You shouldn't have anything on your website that doesn't emphasize your brand. Your brand is the message that you're trying to send. It's what your content communicates. If there's stuff on your website that doesn't match or doesn't make sense, it leaves your audience kind of like, huh? What? And you don't want that. You want them, this is nice. So, form follows function always.
Thank you so much.